In this day and age, there is an expectation that different applications have the means to communicate. The flavor of the month is to use web services to achieve this interoperability. And in this video presentation, we are looking at Moodle's web and external services APIs, which, as you shall see, are very connected. The content of this video has been extracted from the Moodle plugin development by example course from Moodle Publishing. But before we start, if this video proves to be useful and informative, please don't forget to like it. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel for more useful content in the future. If you are so inclined, click the bell notification to be informed when we upload new content. Right, before we start, let's have a look at the web services versus external services. The web services API refers mainly to the API to support the development of web service protocols. So the core protocols, the ones that ship with Moodle, are REST, SOAP, XML, RPC. And if you wanted to develop something else, you could use the API to do so. And then there's two links here to assist you if you want to look further and deeper into the issue of web services. The external services API, on the other hand, allows plugins to expose external services through a web service. Now, external services can be used for other things, but the main reason would be to expose some functionality to a web service. And Moodle ships with a lot of external services because a lot of the core functions, core components, expose external functions. And there's a link to the documentation to allow you to have a look at external functions API. A word of note, uploads and downloads, it's a little bit more complicated when it comes to especially file uploads. When you are using external services, you can't use like the file API really in the way we've discussed previously. And so usually what would happen is the client would have to make two calls. One to the relevant endpoints, the ones we're just going to talk about now, and then the other to the external service passing the item ID for the file. Something very similar to what we did in a previous lesson with our audio feedback. Okay, so the endpoint for uploading files is /webservice/upload.php, and the files are saved in the token users draft area, and the results are returned in JSON format. Positive results will return an array of file object details, including the item ID. And that's the important one, because when you go to the next call, you've passed the item ID, and then the file can be found and then moved into the file area. This is works very similar to what we did with the audio feedback plugin. Okay. And then the other way would be to call web service plugin file PHP, which works like the standard to deliver the files. Okay, there are two other core Moodle functions specifically for just uploading and downloading files: core files upload and core files get files, which are defined in the libdb services.php. So for more information about file support with web services and external services, there's a link here in the presentation. So in the presentation, I mentioned that there are a lot of external services that are already provided by many of the core Moodle components. So here on this page, and the link will be in the lesson, is a list of all the external services that are already developed and ready to use by web services in Moodle. As you can see, there's a lot to do with like calendars, authentication, cohorts, competencies, and a whole chunk of stuff that before you think of developing an external service of any kind, it's always a good idea to come and have a look and see whether the functionality is already available in the core. I mean, sometimes you may need to make a little bit of changes, so you'd be able to call this external service from your external service, do what you need to do with the data, and then before sending it back to the web service as a result. So this is a long list of services in Moodle core. If you found yourself having to develop an external service that is solely simply for the purposes of the providing data to an external service, then your best bet would be to develop a local plugin. Otherwise, if you are providing external service for a plugin that exists, then you would create the external service within framework of that plugin. So let's have a look at how this is all administered in Moodle. So let's see how this all works in Moodle. Okay, I'm going to log in as admin, go to site administration, go to server, and at the bottom here we have web services. Now, because it's a long process, there's a lot of help in setting up. So there's quite a lot of work involved for the site administrator in terms of setting up or allowing access to the local Moodle for web services. So the first thing that needs to be done is you have to enable web services. So by default, web services are not enabled. So you'd have to enable web services. So there's two types of process here. Well, let me step back a little bit. There's process where you got users as clients with token, and you got one which allow an external system to control Moodle. So this is one where you generate a token, give it to the client, and they will make calls with that token. The second example is where users have to generate a token. They log in, they generate a token, and then they can use the external services. And they kind of overlap, as you can imagine. And as you'll see in our example, there's a bit of both being used in our example that we're going to develop. So anyway, the longer process, let's go through that. So you enable the web service, right? And if you click on that, it takes you to the screen that allows you to enable and disable web services. You have to enable the protocols. So you decide which protocols you want to be available. I'm using the back because it's easier. You create a specific user for the web service. You make sure that that user has the right capabilities. Now, you may have mentioned when we were talking about roles and enrollments that I said it's normally only external services or web services that require a role to be defined. And this is what you'd find yourself having to do, to define a role to provide those capabilities to that particular user. Okay, and then you select the services that they will be able to use and the functions. So services and functions are connected. We'll see that as we develop our plugin. And then add the web service as an authorized user, create a token, and enable documentation. Testing the service is actually not really fully developed, because if you look the functionality, if you remember our list that we looked through on the Moodle documentation, that's all that's actually available as part of the test client. So, and the slight difference is obviously with the users as a client, they would need to authenticate. They get a token, they then use that token to access the external services. So these are the steps that the administrator has to go through, allowing for web services, external services. Now, some of it we can help the admin user by defining it in our code, but others, they would have to manually carry out the administrative tasks related to it. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's go and develop our plugin. So there are other ways that Moodle integrates with other external services, and a few of these. The SCORM activity enables AICC HACP functionality, which was a way in which users could share activities outside of the LMS. We have learning tools interoperability. This is new, much newer functionality that's come into Moodle, closely aligned with SCORM. There's a link there for you to go and have a look at. LTI took a few years to get into Moodle. I remember messing about with it before it was actually integrated into the core. It's an interesting way that they've actually done the integration. But if you really wanted to, go and have a look at that. It's quite interesting. Then there are other things like the authentication plugins. We've been through those in a previous lesson, which connect to external services like LDAP and Active Directory, the external database, Shibboleth and OAuth2, etc. So we haven't covered the exporter class. which is another kind of extension that works with external services to export consistent data. But you can always go and have a look at that. Might be a nice exercise for you to try and get your head around with all the knowledge that you now have about Moodle plugin development. So those are the other ways that Moodle integrates with external services. So not really strictly connected to the exporter class, but there are ways in which you can download data from Moodle, which allows you to maybe integrate other systems or use data that's in Moodle to integrate into other systems. So that's it for the presentation. To watch other extracts from the course, click on the playlist link, or alternatively, watch the video describing the course content. Don't forget to subscribe and like, and thanks for watching.